Hello, everybody. My name is Oompa. I'm an artist and poet, and I'm really excited to be here today on season two, episode four of Artdacity. And this episode is called The Money Chase. As we know, typically in Massachusetts, the majority of arts funding is allocated to a few large cultural institutions, leaving a lot to be wanted from creative entrepreneurs and small arts organizations. So today, with the help of my expert panelists, we're going to talk about the common struggles and best practices in securing the money for artists to support their creative visions and figuring out how we can all kind of figure out how to develop the economic landscape of our city. Before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors today, Amazon and the Boston Cultural Council. And again, my name is Oompa. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm more excited to introduce you to this evening's panelists. So to start, we have Emily Rudolph, who is the Executive Director of Mass Creative. Um, she brings 20 years of experience in strategic and management positions for nonprofit arts organizations, including work as the first director of the City of Lynn's Downtown Cultural District. Before joining Mass Creative in 2017, Ruddock was the artist producer at Merrimack Repertory Theater, MRT, where she managed the day to day operations of the artistic department, including hiring, resource logistics rather, and budgeting for theatrical productions. As director of Lynn's Downtown Cultural District, Ruddock was highly regarded by city officials and local arts leaders for her leadership in coordinating arts and cultural organizations for neighborhood revitalization and economic development. Ruddock is a member of the Mass Nonprofit Network's Board of Directors and the 2022 recipient of Arts at the Amory's 2022 Community Activist Award. She holds a master's in public administration from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University and a bachelor's degree in critical social thought from Mount Holyoke College. And you can find her everywhere in the world, including here tonight. So thank you, Emily, for being here. We're really excited to have you. Second up, we have, yeah, of course, thank you. Second up, we have the Sierra Peters, who is the communications director at Boston Ujima Project. She's an artist and writer currently based in Brooklyn, what up? Brooklyn, New York. Her practice includes video installation, writing, and experimental publishing. She's currently the communications director at the Boston Ujima Project, a cooperative business, arts, and investment ecosystem built by and for Boston's working class communities of color. Additionally, she is a program designer at the Create Well Fund, an artist run award program that funds artists of color in their artistic practice and holistic well being. Her recent projects include Print Ain't Dead, a bookstore and publishing platform, Demo Radio, a radio show, and Underground Sound Archive, and the Black Feminist Study Hall. She has given talks at the Cordova Sculpture Park, Harvard Law School, the Consortium for Graduate Studies in Gender, Culture, Women, and Sexuality, Tufts Art Galleries, and guest lectured at MIT, UMass Boston, Rhode Island School of Design, and University of California, Berkeley. And we are just really grateful to have you here with us today, Sierra. So welcome to both of our panelists today. We're really excited.
Yeah.
So I just want to jump right in, say hello and welcome, and just get right into a couple of questions. And the first question is in the search for the resources and the money and the opportunities. How do you research for these funding opportunities? What is your strategy? So maybe we'll just start loosely, and we'll have the both of you answer briefly, and then we'll move from there.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump right in because as a
Yes.
practicing artist, I'm following all the pages. I'm definitely following all the pages, right? So I would definitely say if you're looking for something on like national level, Creative Capital, their website is really fabulous and always has like a really great wealth of resources on a monthly/bi-monthly basis. If you're looking on Instagram, Pick Up the Flow. That is actually run by a DJ who is really passionate about sharing out resources for artists. And I think their name is Berganis, DJ Berganis. And I don't know them personally, but I can definitely vouch for, the work that they do in the underground music scene and also, the work that they're doing online. If you're looking for something more locally, NIFA does a roundup that's like really good. I think Mass Creative also does a roundup. I think it's Mass Creative.
It's Mass Cultural Council.
Mass
Yeah, the
Cultural
Mass
Council. Thank
Cultural
you.
Council.
Thank you. Yeah. So those are usually the places where I start for sure.
Thank you. I'm gonna make sure I reference this in the future. Thank you for that. And Emily, what about you?
Yeah, I co-sign everything that Sarah just said. And I would say that in Massachusetts, one of the things that I think is really unique about our public arts funding structure is that there are almost every city and town in Massachusetts has a local cultural council, and that doesn't exist necessarily in other states. Which is really interesting because it actually gives like very direct local control to community members to decide how those dollars are going to be allocated. And there's a lot of, I'm sure that I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm pretty sure the majority of those dollars are going to artists who apply. It's all project based, and it is a reimbursement system, which I think we can talk about the inequities of a reimbursement system in a moment, I'm sure. But that's a pretty fascinating and pretty unique part of our state, the Commonwealth's public investment in the arts, is that sort of hyper local control and the ability for artists to really to submit and successfully get those grants.
Yeah, and thank you, because that brings me to the next question. And I'm gonna say, like, kind of split it into two. The first is, how do you think bias, in your opinion, plays a role in the iniquities of arts funding? And then, how do you sort of see these councils that you're talking about, these smaller councils? What is their role in mitigating some of that bias, do you think? Let's go, Emily.
Karen, is it be okay if I go first? Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, so look, so Mass Creative was created and is in existence to really build advocacy and policy recommendations for a more equitable and inclusive creative sector in Massachusetts. And so just at the top, I want to recognize that like the arts and cultural sector or ecosystem is made up of a lot of different entities. There are nonprofit arts organizations of various budget sizes. There are individual artists, arts administrators, creative and cultural workers, and then there's also for-profit businesses, right? That are local. We're not talking about like national chains. We're talking chains. We're talking about independent venues or independent arts businesses. And I would say so. So the sort of like my two main takeaways, and one of them, the first one is really something that I felt like became very clear in the last 2.5 years of the pandemic, is that our sector has been splintered apart through the definition of nonprofits, right? So in Massachusetts, the Mass Cultural Council, which is our state arts agency, predominantly is about funding nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. And they also have a very robust program to support individual artists and teaching artists as well. But that piece about if you're an independent venue operator or if you have an independent arts business, there really wasn't anything there for the Mass Cultural Council to provide to support that work. And then on the other side, if you look at our state's economic development department, or if you look at a lot of local cities' economic development infrastructures and departments, they really weren't set up to talk or to consider creative businesses in their strategies and work. And so that's like, to me, that's like a major like missing gap in our overall structure, so that affects individual artists and creative workers, right? Like if the majority of dollars are going to one type of business, like that's an IRS defined business, that really that changes how public investments are being able to get to the entire ecosystem, right? And I think what Mass Creative feels is like we need a really flourishing creative economy and creative sector that has many actors as a part of it. The other piece that I would say is that, I think that in 2022, the definition of what art is, what cultural practice is, what the humanities is vastly different than when the National Endowment for the Arts was set up, right, in the 60s and 70s, right? And there are so many different disciplines. There are integrated disciplines and transmedia disciplines. There are new definitions about artistic excellence that we need to sort of catch up to. And to your question, Oompa, and Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as you as a practicing artist that works across disciplines, is that the majority of public dollars and private philanthropic dollars is set up to support very, I would say, defined disciplinary structures that aren't sort of recognizing the way that art is being made right now, and frankly, the way that people are consuming art or enjoying art. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing that we need to figure out how to remedy. So
Yeah.
those are like my two initial thoughts to begin.
Yeah. I think you swept it up. Thank you. If
Yeah.
I can, yeah, go ahead, Sarah, please.
I mean, I just wanted to piggyback off that, but if you have a follow up, please. I love hearing Emily talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I do too. And it made me also, and maybe I'm like kind of taking it in a different direction too, but part of what I'm seeing even as an individual artist, and thinking about the business structures that I kind of set up for myself, I find myself often sort of having to undo the social ills of the world in order to justify, you know, being able to like even access certain resources. So I'm almost having to position myself as activist or doing social good through art, to undo the things that I shouldn't have to be responsible for. And there's a sort of cyclical thing that's there in terms of narrative. But then when you think about, like you said, the structures and how people are looking at what are the businesses they want to support, to support the endeavors that they're interested in, it's kind of like it's just really hard to access and try to figure out, how to get in there. So small tidbit, but Sierra, I would love to hear from you.
I mean, I what you just said is what I think all the time is that well, one, to piggyback off Emily's point, I think that there is definitely a dearth of funding, specifically in Massachusetts. And, I'm from Boston, so I think about Boston a lot. That's my hometown, for experimental practice to do things that haven't been done before. And I think that you hit it right on the head when we think about, social practice, specifically in Black communities, because I think that that work is really important, right? Like, I think that it's important that we have someone like Simone Leigh and, the new museum creating spaces for, Black women to get massages. And like, I think that that's dope, right? To put that alongside her other work.
For
And
sure.
should you have to do that in order to get funding, in order for people to see that, like, well, your work is benefiting the community? What if the community benefit is actually just the enjoyment of the work? And perhaps it's like you rapping in a town square. Maybe it doesn't have to be performative. Maybe it's just you on wax or something, like supporting your
Right.
records or something like that. But I think about that quite a bit because I think that it's really unfair, to be quite honest, that, we ask that of Black artists, POC artists, in a way that we don't necessarily ask of anyone else. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily ask white men's art to respond to social issues in the same way that we do of people of color. And I don't really want to get into like the whole Black artist, just artist discourse at all, but I do think that, there is yeah, just a level of unfairness to that, and how that gets played out, not just like in the visual representation, but also how it's talked about, and how you have to then talk about yourself and commodify yourself in order to gain funding.
Yeah.
So when we talk about biases, like that is just one that's very plain. And I
Yeah.
think that there is also, I don't know, Oompa, if you experience this, or Emily, if you have experienced this either, but I can definitely say when I'm thinking about my younger self, my friends, the community that I was around, another bias that I see a lot, especially with the visual arts, is, if you don't go to art school, what access do you have into some of these spaces?
Yeah.
If you're just a young artist that's like applying for grants and you just have what you've made, the beats that you've made on your computer, or, your assemblage video that you just cut and edited in Pro and Adobe Creative Cloud or something like that. Like, will people see you as serious, even though you're like doing the work to make yourself be taken seriously because you're an emerging artist and you haven't had like a super big project yet? I
Right.
think, there is I think everybody is doing such amazing, cool things, and I wish that there was, and I try to create more space for people that we haven't really heard about before, or that we haven't really seen before, especially young people, because I think that it's super important that they get the opportunity to express themselves the same way that, the 30, 40 plus people should. And not to say, it's not either or, but I do think that, I think it's important, and when I'm a
Yeah,
40-year-old baddie, I would be like, yeah, I want my things. And I think that's important.
right.
But yeah, I think, Emily gave two, maybe I'll stop there, but I do have a lot of thoughts on this.
I love that. No,
Can
please, I
I?
can listen to you.
Yeah,
Please, you
yeah.
can.
Sierra, the one of the things you said about like the gate, like the gatekeeping, right? About like
Yeah.
what makes you an artist, right? That there's accreditation or qualifications that are required. One of confession as one of those 40-year-olds, right? I think one of the things
No.
that I actually see as a point of like real inspiration is that the evolution of the pro-am, the pro-amateur. And I think
Mhm.
that obviously, first of all, that terminology is super problematic and I wish I had a better term, but the idea that like it used to require you used to be required to go to an art school or go to a conservatory to get training to use very expensive equipment in order to make your art or record your art. And now that's not there. Those sort of obstacles are being broken down all the time. And I actually see
Mhm.
that as like, I think something that to me is very inspiring. And I'm hoping that very soon we're going to see how that actually shifts that conversation. So I
Mhm.
agree with you that, to get the major fellowships, and this is across disciplines, there's
Mhm.
credentials that sort of fast track you. And then
Right.
this piece about how there are new platforms that can shift or accelerate visibility is so
Mhm.
crucial, particularly when
Mhm.
we're talking about historic inequities in how
Mhm.
private and public dollars have been allocated.
Yeah, no, and I think that for me, like what's underneath the issue is less about it's accreditation, but it's also connections, finding those
Hmm.
connections that will allow you to make the next step in your career. But it's also about moving from
Totally.
a product-based arts economy into a holistic idea of supporting artists. So you can get your rent paid, like you can really pay your bills with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that moving from perhaps like, well, I think that project based grant funding is important. I have loved my journey with Create Well, because it has opened my idea about what it means to support an artist, and what it means to support their wellness, just, not just in their projects. I know, Oompa, you probably had this problem where you got like 4 projects in the summer that are due, and you're like, when am I going to enjoy my summer? When am I going to enjoy my fall? Right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
when am I going to live my life? I think we've
yeah.
all been there. And so moving from the project being an end goal to your life being the project and your
No,
career being
right.
the
Hmm.
project,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I love that.
That is really, really, that's spot on, Sierra. That's spot on.
Yeah. I had a comment I wanted to make to something you said a couple responses ago, but if it comes back up, I'll get into it.
Mhm.
I want to know, what do you think? And obviously there's a here, so I want to know it, but it's also here. What do you think the impact of the division of like arts funding is doing to the New England cultural landscape? What do you think that impact is having?
Sorry, I have
Tiara, do
some
you want?
very strong
Yeah, yeah,
feelings.
yeah. I'll start.
But
I
Sierra,
mean,
you should go first.
my goodness, if I think about and I explore like the ecosystem mentality, I think to have like metaphor, not mentality. It is mentality, but the metaphor right now, if I could just like wax poetic about this real quick. I think to have a thriving ecosystem, you have to have a lot of different things, and you have to have different levels of funding, and you have to
Yeah,
have different entry points for different kinds of artists. So for musicians and for DJs, shout out to BAMS Fest for the work that they're doing to make sure that live music has a place in Boston. I can't really, I'm going to be honest, thinking about New England is a little bit broad for me. So I'm going to talk about Boston a lot in this conversation. However, you know, when I think about like the different spaces, so I was really big, or I still am, I guess. I used to be a DJ. I guess I'm still a DJ. But when I was like, trying to be a DJ, trying to get gigs, like there wasn't really a lot of institutional support for that. And we were kind of just like ragtag. It's a very small music scene, Oompa, as you know. So you're really just like putting up the decorations,
Yep.
booking the venue, booking your friends to play the music, and maybe you like put together, five, six, seven, $800 to bring someone from out of town to come in. But it's hard to retain, that level of talent. It's hard. Like
Yeah.
again, like they talk about this in Boston a lot, but the brain drain. I've seen so many dope, amazing, internationally traveling now musicians, DJs that started in Boston that have since moved to Providence, have since moved to other parts of either New England or somewhere completely far away, in order to sustain their practice, in order to
Yeah.
like live a good life. So that's just like a
Yeah.
very simple, answer is just like, how do we support all the facets that bring people to a place like this? How do we make sure that, somebody wants to just throw a block party, that they can just throw the block party, and like, they're just making space for people. If you want to DJ, there are venues for you to DJ. And these are all things that we've heard before, right? But again, these are the things that I think about. It's not just visual arts. It's not just performing arts. What about, or music? What about, all the other people that make up that ecosystem?
If I can jump in, and this brings me back to the thing that came up for me earlier, is I think the thing that we forget too is that there are so many major institutions, money making machines that piggyback on culture and art to make more of its dollars. And then when you say as an artist, what about also, in addition to your practice, using this thing that you do as a vehicle for economic advancement? Like, if we're in this game of capitalism, I think we should get to choose how or how we don't participate in that, right? Like, and I think that sometimes what ends up happening is you're like having to make space and justify why space making is important. You have to justify why this is important. You have to service a need in a community that you never created in the first place, and then that your art is justified based on that. And do you know how many people like that I know who don't have institutional experience or access, who can't even start to begin to have these, who don't even know the players and how to have these conversations, who are amazing
Right.
artists and never sort of get to have the time of day,
Yeah. Like, why are
Yeah.
we required to be both the space builders and also inhabit the space? Like, that is fundamentally, again, unfair,
Yeah.
and gives other communities, when you just get to make your art and do your shit, like, imagine what you could do with all that extra energy,
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a small scene, right? So most of the time you have to play those two roles. But I agree with you. What if we couldn't, or what if we didn't?
What if you didn't want to, right? Like, and that's okay.
Mm.
Sorry, Emily, you got a lot.
I
I
no
Let's go.
no I so I like I there's a couple of pieces that for that you're both talking about that in my head are about infrastructure of the sector, and that there has been like Sarah, your point about like having to hold and make space as well as like do the do the space. But or excuse me, it was Sarah again. You talking about being a DJ and like that there's no larger infrastructure, and that's, to me, that's about a economic sector that has been historically underinvested in, right? Like we hear all the time about the eds and meds in Massachusetts, which are certainly a very strong part of our economy. But the reality is that the creative economy is providing a significant amount of economic value to Massachusetts. And
Yes.
that, part of our work at Mass Creative is about like, how do we put forward policy recommendations that maybe aren't even about money, but are about like, how are we getting the Department of Labor and the Department of Economic Development in Massachusetts to build out a creative economy workforce strategy and plan? How are we, like, if, how are we sort of saying, like, yes, we can train people up for biomed jobs. That's great. But there's also the need to train up and assist creative workers and creative entrepreneurs to stay in their communities, to be able to plug into a larger infrastructure that requires tending, and that there's a role for government to play in that, not the entire role. So that was one of the thoughts. And then the other one that goes to the original question about, like, what happens when there's this siloing or this, like, sort of rending, I would say, is we get into scarcity mentality, and this piece about, like, it's a zero-sum game, and if one type of organization or one type of individual gets the funding, then nobody else does. And frankly, I think that's doing enormous harm even to our most, I would say, storied and visible cultural institutions, right? Like, the point about how a lot of our predominantly white and larger cultural institutions are, commodifying local artists, right, to come in and do a one-off, right, is very problematic, and is harming them as well as the artists that they are, that they are bringing in and perpetrating harm to, whether they want to or not, or feel it, or intending to or not. And I just, like, one of the things that Mass Creative sort of has worked for the last decade on is about just fundamentally increasing the amount of public dollars that are being invested in the arts and cultural sector. But there needs to be very clear, like, value conversation about how those dollars are distributed, and a recognition of that as more money is being allocated to the sector, we also need to be thoughtful as communities, whether it's local with the Boston Cultural Council, whether it's statewide with the Mass Cultural Council, to really recognize the places that have been historically underinvested in, and the people who are at the core of that work, who are tired and should not be required to make the space and fill the space all at once.
Thank you both. Absolutely. I'm here, like, and mentally doing but not wanting to mess with the microphone. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah. Can I just say something real quick? Because
Sure
this
can.
last point, you were just like, I'm like, come on, somebody.
Right?
Right? Like, something that I think about a lot too. I mean, like, there's a lot in this constellation that I, like, want to piggyback on, but I think, in addition to government funding, which, like, for any country, we see it in Europe, we see it in South America, we see it in all these different places, is that government funding is huge, right, for artists, like experimental films that we would never have access to, coming out of all types of places that had government funding. And I would challenge private and nonprofits outside of government to think about more experimental ways to support sustainable artist careers. How do we think about supporting artists in the most broadest and perhaps furthest sense of the word? Are you buying their art? Are you buying their music? Are you buying a ticket even though you're not going to show up? Are you donating for a ticket? Like, there are a lot of different ways to support artists that's not just, again, project-based grant funding. I also think, to your point about museums, I'm always thinking about this, is about how people are curated in, right? Like, so, like, how do we challenge museums to actually not think about a event or a pop-up, but to curate people into a show, and to have that be a part of their record, and to collect the work of local artists. And I never want to be in a position where I'm telling a curator what to collect. However, like, what can we do? Like, if we all recognize that there's an issue, how else can we be supportive?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Sierra, absolutely right. And that's about, like, a statement of clearly articulating values, right? Like, if, and this is, I'm about to about to swim into the deep end of a space that I just don't have the knowledge base. But like, if you're curating a show and you're transparent about your values and that curation, and those are articulated, that there's no there's no mystery there. I also, on top of that, I also, yeah, I was going to say too about this idea about like being risky and experimental in the ways that we support artists, is that there are examples in other parts of the nation that are doing this, right? Like, so, San Francisco and Yerba Buena was, I think, the first ones to out of the gate to pilot a universal basic income program for artists, right?
Yeah.
The city of, New York City is also experimenting with that. There was a version of that in Western Massachusetts called Artists at Work, which was in part about just providing artists with an income during the pandemic, but was also about, and this is where it's a little dicey, recognizing the value that artists play in community care and partnering them with nonprofits in Western Mass, both social service and arts nonprofits, to not necessarily go like, you will by the end of this do X, but to say like, come in and just be a part of this work. Like, let's figure out how to how you fit into this larger piece of system work. And I think like, look, we have the medical might of the world in Massachusetts. We have some of the most reputable and like leading educational institutions in Massachusetts. We have so much financial resource. To your point, Sarah, that's not just about public dollars, but is about private dollars. That like there are the brains and the resources to allow for risk, but most of our nonprofit organizations are like caught in this capitalistic crap. We've got to make our budget, and the only way to make the budget is through either highly subsidized ticket sales and subscriber sales, like older models, antiquated models of doing business that are forcing artistic decisions that are not benefiting our sector.
Yeah. And I think for me, like a huge part of this is how we reframe thinking about artists. So in order to understand that we need a universal basic income, you also have to understand that a starving artist is not just like an artist. That's just what happens, right? Like that doesn't come out of a vacuum. That person is working class, right? And they have a working class experience. And so how do we understand, and this is just like, for me, can we understand this as wealth redistribution if you're a working class artist? Can we understand this as, for me and my family, I'm like, nobody really got to be an artist and they're all artists, right? Like, is it healing for me to think about like, in 10 plus years or in 5 plus years, can I have a sustainable career? Is that healing some part of my lineage? But I also think, like, can we work together to create more experimental things? If you don't want to do it on your own, at Ujima, we redistributed like 60K. I think that we collected it from 12 organizations for the Ashe Ashe grant. Everybody got $5,000, which, like, to be honest, isn't like, I wish that we could pay more, right? Like, I always wish that we could pay more, but felt decent for, the ask, which was like create something that folks can enjoy. Super simple application process.
Yeah.
And so, how can we collaborate in ways that would allow for that?
Sorry, so I'm gonna pause this here because we're gonna have time during the Soul Bowl to like ask questions and do a little bit of a back and forth. But as you were thinking 5 and 10 years ahead, right? I guess that leads me to the final question before we get into the Soul Bowl, which is, and I'm not asking, I'm taking ownership of this question to say I'm not asking for only the idealist, dreamed up version, but for what you see and what you believe, what is the future? What does the future of cultural capital look like?
You want to go, Emily?
Oh, sure, Sierra. Let me.
I mean, I can go. I have
my
ideas.
Magic 8-ball. Good. You should go. I would like to be inspired by your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say number one for me, at least like in my practice as, when I'm thinking about arts admin, is we just talked about it, coalition building. So coalition building, amongst artistic people, amongst like artists and community members, nonprofits, between nonprofits and nonprofits, just like everybody building together to get towards, the cultural economy that we want to see, right? I think like Ujima is so inspiring to me because it does mean collective work and responsibility. And so I try to think like in the most grounded sense, how do we make collective work and responsibility happen when I'm doing, and our team actually, James Van Boy, Paige Curtis, Nia Evans, when we're doing this work, how do we ground ourselves in that is a question that we always try to answer. Definitely experimentation, right? Like normative institutional logics shouldn't exist. And that's just me speaking as me, right? Like how do we queer those? How do we change those? How do we start testing out new programs, new policies? All of the works with feedback from community about what's working, what's not, and intentionality. I think at least for I think from an organizational level, how are you structuring your grants? Are you, again, like you mentioned earlier, Emily, are you asking people to like pay first and then you kind of get paid back? Like, is that really fair? Especially for people who already don't have money. I remember not having money and having to do some of those programs, and it was not fun to get reimbursed for Ubers after, Ubering around the city to get the show together. Endowed with the cultural and social capital that your organization brings. I think the question is just like, what are you actually doing with it? And just being really critical about that. So hopefully, free rent, healthcare, right? And people getting to do what they want to do.
Yes, I love that. Thank you, Sierra. Emily.
I would like to live in Sierra's future. That feels like a place where frankly, we will all just be better off.
Right.
I also, I will confess to you all that like I am someone who feels comfortable in a lot of systems, and that is because of the privilege that I hold, right? And that's a reality. And I also feel pretty passionately that part of my role and part of the work that I want to do is working within those systems for significant change. And I think that's where Mass Creative really wants to live, right? And so if I think about a future both in Boston and then the Commonwealth, I think about how do we advance policy decisions that are going to support the work that Sierra is talking about. So as I mentioned before, we're going to have a new governor, right? After November. And what does it look like if that governor says to their Secretary of Economic Development and Housing, we want to prioritize artists. We want to make sure artists stay in their communities. We want to prioritize ensuring that every resident of Massachusetts benefits from creative expression and artistic forms, right? Because we all know, right? Like there's individual artists need space to do their work, and that individuals in Massachusetts need to be able to benefit from a culturally rich and artistically diverse Commonwealth. And that part of that will only happen if we start moving existing structures and systems to support that work. So that's one place that I'm really like interested in. The other thing that we think a lot about is, and Sarah, I'm really glad you said this at the end, is that all of this work is intersectional by nature, right? Like if you can't afford to live in Boston without 4 side hustles as well as your art, that is not that is not a healthy ecosystem here.
Talk about it, Emily.
And the reality about living in Boston, or frankly, I used to be able to say like within 495, but honestly, it's across the Commonwealth now. Is that's not something that just artists or arts administrators are facing, right? It's everyone is feeling let me show that many people and many working class people in Massachusetts are facing displacement. So to your point, Sarah, about coalition building, how can, and frankly, Boston Majima is doing this so fantastically already, but how can more artists and more arts organizations and cultural organizations lean into that larger coalition work with the goal of saying, like, we will all be better off if there is a more equitable housing economy in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with transportation. So, same thing with healthcare. So I worry that that sounds really Pollyanna-ish, but I think that, like, what a healthy diverse sector has is it has folks working within systems and structures, and then people who and individuals and organizations who are working to do that experimentation and risk and push us all forward in a way that, like, realizes the community and the cultural capital we want to see in Massachusetts.
Mm. Thank you, Emily. Thank you to the two of you. Wow, I can hear you talk all day, both of you. I'm just taking in so many gems. But we're in this part of the segment where it's so bold. So each of you will have a question to ask the other, and each person answering the question will have 2 minutes to respond. But like I said, I can hear you talk all day, so I'm happy to close an eye or two if we're at 2:10. So let's get to it.
Emily, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, Sierra, I was thinking about our conversation tonight. I was thinking about my immense respect for Boston Ujima, um, and also learning a little bit about you, and sort of your practice. And my questions have shifted, and through our conversations, my question has shifted. So I had like one written down, but my question for you is as a practicing artist and as an arts administrator who's also working with a organization that is intentionally focused on alternative structures. What sustains you in this work? What are the things that keep you going, and where? Yeah, that's my question.
That is such a beautiful question. Thank you. I would definitely say what sustains me is, I mean, one belief, like hope, to, for a lack of a better term, like the belief that like another world is happening or like another world is possible, and that we, this country, can get to that other side. I know that there is, I don't know, a lot of like, oof, how do I say this? I know that there are a lot of narratives that tell us that we can't redress like monumental crimes in this country,
Mm.
that like things will stay the way that they are. But I don't know. I believe in the counterfiction. I believe that like we can write our own stories. I believe that like if I believe it, I'm a manifester. So I believe if I can see it, I can have it. So like while we're in like this weird, dark, not fun period, I think I saw a meme, and I think we've all seen this, where it's like, I'm tired of living in a historical period. Like, I'm tired of living through history or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like, I'm tired of living through like major historical moments. Maybe that's what it was. And, I do believe that through all of this, we can emerge with like new, critical, necessary systems. That we all need. So it's really, I mean, belief, like community. I have an awesome community around me, friends, family, family as friends, friends as family. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was just gonna ask you, like, so I am really big into literature, and so I was wondering, like, perhaps something that you read recently or something that you've read a long time ago, like, what has really grounded your or what has really like framed your thinking around arts and cultural economies?
Wow. Two really good questions.
I'm sorry.
Sierra,
Is
so
that a bad word?
I'm going to start. I'm going to start with a little mini confession, which is I have become the person who, instead of holding space for myself to read, I've become a real habitual doom scroller. So that this summer was like the summer of me being like, you got to get it together, Ruddick. Like, stop doing this
Oh
to
my
yourself.
goodness.
So if it's okay, I'd like to talk about. So the first part of my career was in theater, um, and and producing theater and making theater. And I had the opportunity to work for a theater company down in Louisville, Kentucky called Actors Theater of Louisville that sort of made its national name by producing a new play festival and called the Humana Festival. And and so I got the opportunity to work on the Humana Festival for about a decade, right? Um, and one of the things that I really loved is that, frankly, through a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, the theater was able to commission a play by a playwright named Naomi Izuka called At the Vanishing. She eventually named it At the Vanishing Point, but it was based on interviews with community members in a neighborhood of Louisville called Butchertown. Like, by the spoilers, super on the name nose for a neighborhood. It was the meatpacking district of Louisville. And it was a very working class neighborhood for many generations. People were able to raise their families and have good lives. And then, you know, stop me if you've heard this before. One by one, those meatpacking plants started to shut down until there was only one that was not paying, you know, was not providing wages that were really able to sustain families to live. And those families were starting to leave and disappear. And again, stop me if you've heard this before. People were gentrifying the neighborhood. And so the goal for this project was to document the stories of the people who lived in that neighborhood and create it into a piece of theater that would, you know, theater's always ephemeral. So, you know, but that would be a historical record and a piece of art. And so we produced it in the 2003, so like what, a million years ago, Humana Festival. And we actually produced it in a old warehouse in Butchertown. And so, like, instead of community members from Butchertown and from that neighborhood that were remaining having to trek to the theater, was in their backyard. And, you know, the people who normally would feel very comfortable in our theater, you know, who felt like they had, you know, assumed access and privilege, were sitting in an old warehouse in the middle of Butchertown, right? On like lovely period Formica chairs. And I got to see that play, and I wept profusely. And for me, it's one of the pieces of art that I turn to when I want to remind myself about the work that we're doing, because it is about lifting up the voices and the narratives of people who are left out of larger decision making, who are not prioritized when government is making decision, when philanthropists and business are making decision. It forced people physically to reevaluate their orientation to art. And it is one of my favorite pieces of literature and favorite pieces of art, Sierra. So I hope I answered your question.
I think
But yeah, I love that
so.
play.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love being also expansive about like what literature is. Like, yes. Or it didn't have to be a book, so I thank you. I think that's
I
so
do promise
awesome.
I've read books, though.
Oh my goodness, no. You don't have to explain yourself to me. No.
These are great questions. Sorry, I have one question for the both of you, and I'm going to just take us outside of our work for a second. And
Mm.
Sierra, sorry, Emily, my question was initially, what is your contract for being alive, right? Like for staying alive in this
Ooh.
world. But I think what I'm just gonna, because I think maybe you asked that when you were asking about what sustains you. So we can either answer that or like just the simple, what brings you joy? Like
Mm.
where's your joy?
So when I transitioned from being a performer to being an arts administrator, um, I, I I was 25 and I sat down and I said, "What's your mission statement for your life? What's your mission statement for your career?" And I
Yes.
decided my mission statement was to support and make opportunities for the artists that I truly believe in to be successful. And
Mm.
and I think anyone who's gone through a strategic planning process knows you want your mission statement to be, well, transparent and specific, but also allow you to evolve. And so when I made the decision to leave producing and go back to school to, frankly, become a professional a lobbyist for the arts and professional advocate for the arts, I reflected back on that mission statement and I was like, nope, I'm still doing that. And so that is that's my professional life. In terms of my personal life, what sustains me is I have a 6-year old. I have a partner who is a artist himself. He's a theatrical lighting designer, um,
Mm,
and watching my child blossom through her own creativity is like, man, there is nothing quite like that.
mm,
And getting to see my husband be amazing at his work. He did the lights for a show in Boston called Quixote Nuevo that was at the Huntington, and he like made sunsets happen, right? And so it was beautiful. It's like beautiful to watch the person you love be great at their shit.
mhm.
Apologies for the language.
No apologies. We love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, do I get to ask Uber a question?
Yeah, I
Sure,
want to ask you,
please.
but I want.
Right.
I'm
I
here
didn't
for
know.
it.
Okay. Okay. Because I've been thinking about this a lot. Because and especially since we were talking earlier, because I think that in a lot of ways we are like encountering in our society, like we're encountering a past that's like not really a past. It's like the
Mm.
ghost of a past or something like that. So like, what do you think about counter narratives? Like, that's what I want to know from you.
What do I think about counter narratives at large?
Or just like, I don't know, like counter narratives in your practice. Like, I don't know, just something around like it's just coming up for me.
Yeah, I hope I answered this right, but I feel like if it don't feel right, if it ain't right, I can rewrite it. And I can live by it, right? Like I think that I've watched myself understand myself through the things that I've written. I've watched myself understand myself, or I've watched myself write my own future so I could walk into it. And so for me, I think that what I think about counter narratives is spell making, spell casting and magic making. It's the ability to say something isn't working, and so here's the story I'm telling and telling myself and telling the world in hopes that, and I think that's what people do all the time, except they do
Mhm.
it, in interest of themselves or in interest in something else. When
Mhm.
my interest is in creating a world for myself and other people, because I think I truly believe that in order for me to truly have a life worth living and one that's joyous, like for all of us, that we should all experience that, at the highest level. And so I think that, I'm wanting to create that. I'm wanting to use that power to create that for myself and for the people around
Mm.
me.
Okay. Oompa
Yeah.
season, whatever year of life you're on, Oompa's the main character. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Did you want to briefly tell us about what brings you joy? I'm still curious about that.
Oh, snap.
Sierra.
Oh, I didn't know I had to answer. What brings me joy? I mean, I'm a real simple person. I'm a very simple person. So the things that bring me joy usually, being outside, uh, forest bathing, like going to the park and sitting outside on a bench for long periods of time. Obviously, being by bodies of water. Uh, I will always, it's taken me however many minutes we're into this to tell you that I'm a Sagittarius. So
I was about
count
to
yourself as
ask.
lucky. Count
I
yourself
was
as lucky
asking.
that I waited this long.
I was
To
gonna.
have
That
it.
was gonna be my first question.
Oh, see, I love talking about astrology. I love
You
talking
have a
about
lot of
astrology.
earth
But
in
yeah,
your chart, though.
so I actually have a lot of water. So I have a lot of Sagittarius. So I'm a Sagittarius sun and moon, and then I have a Cancer rising, Cancer Mars. So that makes me like basically Scorpio. Like I used to tell people I was basically Drake because it's like very like fiery, but it's also like very emotional and like popping off,
Yeah.
but like not really, you know?
Yep. It just depends on what you're given. Yep.
Exactly.
Sorry. I have another question. Sorry, I know you said that earlier. From myself or Sierra, and then we're gonna Oh, okay, no, great. Yeah. Air sign, lots of earth sign everywhere. So yeah, Emily.
Enjoy.
Before we end, I want to know what is your sign?
Oh, so I am like I think like I'm a double down Scorpio. So I'm
Oh,
like, yeah, like I'm an
there it
intense,
is.
tense lady. And
Love
I, like, what was it? The piece that like I'm very, very loyal, and I will like that's the hill I will die on is,
that. Yeah.
informs informs my personal and professional life.
I love
But
that.
yeah, I hear
I
you
love
with that water side and with that fieriness, Sierra.
I guess I ended the this by talking about what makes me feel a lot of joy, which is learning other people's charts. So thank you all, and one more big thank you to Emily Ruddock and Sierra Peters for being here today and just dropping gems. And I hope you do follow up and follow the work that the both of them are doing. I know I will. I feel super fortunate to be here tonight. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have
I,
anything you want to plug before we go? What's going on? What's next for you? What's up for you? What do you want folks to know about?
Oh my goodness. So definitely for Ujima, what's upcoming? I mean, if you're a member, a couple votes, really important investment votes will be coming up. If they have not already started. So that's huge. Go vote. um, we're having a party on September 24th, I believe. It's called Black Portals 1, and it's going to be like really fun, open bar. There's going to be like a projections kind of installation slash exhibition. So it's going to be like videos projected on the wall. And DJ Kendrick, Kensworth, I'm sorry. Oof, please. DJ Kensworth is going to be there in this spot. It's 7 to 12. Yeah, and follow us online as always. It's at Ujima Boston, ujimaboston.com on all platforms. So, yeah,
Doing it
exactly.
right. Yeah, I'm on it. I'll be there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hit me up. We can
I
list you.
Done. Done. Sorry, Emily. What are you up
I
to?
want I want to tell everybody that they should be following Boston Ujima, that the work that Boston Ujima is doing is like central to really shifting the conversation in Boston. And I have just thank you for your work, Sarah, and to the whole team. Um, Mass Creative is working on our Create the Vote Coalition work, which is about making sure that candidates running for governor and lieutenant governor are paying attention to the issues of the arts and cultural community. And so just last night, we actually held a lieutenant governor forum in Worcester. So we will be releasing a recording of that soon. So please be on the lookout for that. And then I would also remind folks that we have a primary in Massachusetts on September 6th, and that you can still register to vote.
Do it.
So don't, if you haven't already read, if you are eligible, if you have not been disenfranchised and you can vote, please register to vote. And then we obviously have the first Tuesday in November, we're going to have a general election. And on that general election will be a ballot question called the Fair Share Amendment, which is about the fair share of getting folks to pay their fair share. And those investments will go into education and transportation, which the Create the Vote Coalition feel are part of the work that is necessary to make sure that artists can stay in their communities and that everyone can access the benefits for arts and culture. So we highly, highly encourage folks to support the Fair Share Amendment and follow us on our various channels.
Yes. Thank you, Emily. And for me, working on some new music, doing some live shows around
Yes.
tune in, but also I respond. I'm able to start an incubator through my partnership with the City of Boston through the Workforce Development RFP in partnership with the Record Co and some private funders to be able to collectivize the talent, the great talents that are around me to in service of other artists. So over the course of the next 15 months, just kind of doing some artist development stuff, artist support, just getting people to help them not only creatively and to help their visions come to life in an artistic way, but also to think about how it is that folks can survive and do well in this life of being an artist. So stay tuned for the stuff that's to come. That's Outlawed Entertainment. So yeah, it should be a cool thing. And you can follow
Yay.
else too. So out loud. Again, Sierra, Emily, thank you. I'm gonna follow both of you everywhere you go. You can't get rid of me. And I just want to say thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone tuning in to this episode, The Money Chase. Really excited to be here. Really excited you joined us. The next Artdacity episode will air on Thursday, September 22nd. And if you would like to be the first to learn more about upcoming BAMS Fest events, please visit bamsfest.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We encourage all of you to follow and like us on all social media platforms at BAMS Fest, BAMS Fest. And until next time, y'all have a great night.
Art.